Welcome to Wickless Night. There is something different about a night with no light at all, no candle burning, no lamp in the corner, just darkness, silence, and the feeling that something may be closer than it should be. Tonight's stories come from people who lived through moments they still cannot explain. A sound in an empty room, a stranger at the door, a shadow that moved when no one else was there. Before we step into the dark, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy slow, unsettling, true horror stories, subscribe to Wickless Night. Get comfortable. The lights are already gone. One day a few years ago, I was walking my dog through my neighborhood like I had done 100 times before. I live in a woodsy area, so seeing animals around there has never been unusual. There are squirrels everywhere. Birds move through the trees all day. Sometimes you see rabbits close to the brush, deer farther back near the woods, or the occasional fox cutting across an empty lot. There are always sounds coming from somewhere. The rustle of leaves, wings moving in the branches, something small running through dry grass. Because of that, I usually do not pay much attention when I catch movement from the corner of my eye. Most of the time, it is nothing. A squirrel jumping from a tree, a bird landing on a fence, a shadow moving across the ground because the wind shifted the branches above it. That afternoon started out completely normal. The weather was mild enough for a long walk. It was not dark, not stormy, and not one of those days where the sky makes everything look strange. There was decent light outside. I remember the neighborhood being quiet in the ordinary way it often was during the day. A few distant cars moved along the main road, but the smaller streets were mostly empty. My dog was walking ahead of me, stopping every few feet to smell something. Dogs always seem to find things in the grass that humans cannot see. Every mailbox post, clump of weeds, tree trunk, and patch of dirt becomes important to them. I had my phone in my hand, probably scrolling occasionally whenever my dog stopped for longer than necessary. We were walking past a newer section of the neighborhood where homes were still being built. The construction area had several houses in different stages of completion. Some had finished siding and windows, but no landscaping. Some were just frames with exposed wood. Others had piles of lumber, rolls of insulation, dumpsters, or equipment sitting in driveways. It did not look creepy. It just looked unfinished. There were wide open yards with no mature trees yet, fresh dirt near the sidewalks, and construction vehicles parked around the lots. The newer homes stood out against the woods because everything about them looked clean, bright, and recently placed there. A large vehicle was parked near one of the houses. I do not remember exactly what type of vehicle it was. It may have been a work truck, a contractor's truck, or something connected to the construction site. What I remember is that it was large enough to block part of my view of the driveway and the space behind it. My dog and I were still walking along the street when I noticed movement from the corner of my eye. At first, I assumed it was a bird. That was the most normal explanation. The movement was dark and quick, close to the vehicle. It looked like something had passed behind it from one side to the other. Since the area was near the woods, it could have been almost anything. A crow, a turkey, a deer moving through a gap, a dog that had gotten loose, or even someone working around the construction site. I turned my head to look properly, and that was when I saw it. It was a black, crow-like figure, but it was enormous. The first thought that hit me was that it was too big. It was not just a large bird. It was not a turkey. It was not a vulture. It was not anything that made sense in relation to the truck beside it. It looked as large as a box truck. That sounds impossible when I say it now, but that was how it appeared in that moment. It seemed huge enough that it should have towered over anything around it. Its body was dark, almost completely black, and it had the shape of a massive bird. The legs looked bird-like, long and bent in the wrong-looking way, with the kind of backward joint birds have. I could not see every detail clearly, but I saw enough to know it was not a person. It moved with a strange bobbing motion, like a bird stepping across the ground. Its head dipped forward and up again as it walked. That was what made it feel especially real. It did not just stand there, like a dark shape. It moved. It bobbed its head. It passed behind the vehicle, as though it was trying to avoid being seen. For a second, I froze. My dog did not immediately react the way I expected. That confused me even more. Usually, if there is a deer nearby, a strange animal in the brush, or even another dog across the street, my dog notices before I do. But in that moment, my dog was still focused on the ground. I looked again. The thing was still moving. It was not fast. It had a heavy, deliberate walk. Each movement seemed slow compared to the size of its body. Its legs took long steps. Its head dipped and rose in that bird-like way. I could not see wings clearly. I could not see a beak clearly. I could not see eyes. But the overall shape was unmistakably bird-like. A huge black bird, far larger than any bird should have been. My first instinct was not fear. It was confusion. My brain was trying to fit what I saw into something ordinary. I wondered if there was a large piece of machinery behind the vehicle. Maybe the shape was some kind of equipment covered with a dark tarp. Maybe a worker was carrying something large. Maybe two objects lined up at a strange angle, and my mind was turning them into a creature. But then it moved again. The head bobbed. The legs stepped forward. And I knew I had seen something moving behind the vehicle. My phone was already in my hand. That was the part that made the whole thing more frustrating. Usually, when something strange happens, you are not ready. You are driving. You are half asleep. You do not have your camera out. You see something for 1 second, then it disappears, and later you wish you had proof. But I had my phone right there. I pulled up the camera as quickly as I could. I did not want to get too close, but I started walking toward the vehicle. My dog came with me, still sniffing and pulling slightly on the leash. I remember trying to keep my eyes on the place where the figure had gone while tapping my screen to open the camera. By the time I reached the side of the vehicle, it was gone. There was nothing there. No giant bird, no dark shape, no strange set of tracks that I could see, no feathers, no movement behind the truck, nothing. The space behind the vehicle was open enough that there should have been nowhere for something that large to hide. That was what made my stomach drop. If it had been a normal animal, it could have run into the woods. A dog could have slipped behind a house. A deer could have crossed the yard and disappeared through a gap in the trees. Even a large bird could have flown upward into the branches. But this thing had looked huge. It had looked too large to vanish behind a vehicle without making a sound or leaving some obvious sign of where it went. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space. My phone camera was open. I slowly moved around the vehicle, expecting to see it on the other side. Nothing. I looked toward the unfinished house. Nothing. I looked down the driveway. Nothing. I scanned the nearby yards. Nothing. The construction site was quiet. There was no worker nearby. No one calling out. No equipment running. No sound of wings. No heavy footsteps. No branches shaking in the tree line. Just the normal quiet of a neighborhood in the middle of the day. My dog finally looked up, but not in any clear direction. She may have smelled something. She may have noticed my sudden tension. She may simply have been wondering why I had stopped moving. I pulled gently on the leash and tried to make myself keep walking, but I could not stop looking back. I kept expecting to see the thing reappear. I kept expecting it to step around the side of the truck or rise above the roofline. I imagined seeing a massive black head lifting over the vehicle, its body too large to belong in that neighborhood. Nothing happened. The place stayed empty. I walked farther down the street, then stopped again. From a distance, I could see more of the construction area. I looked at the trees beyond the houses. I looked at the rooftops. I looked at the open lots and the spaces between unfinished homes. There was nothing unusual anywhere. No black bird, no large animal, no shadow moving behind equipment. It was as if the thing had never been there. The more I thought about it, the stranger it became. I had been sober. I had not been drinking, smoking, or taking anything. I had not been sick. I had not been awake all night. I was not in a panic before I saw it. I was simply walking my dog in familiar surroundings. That made it harder to understand. If I had been exhausted, I could blame tiredness. If it had been late at night, I could blame darkness. If I had been driving, I could blame a quick glimpse and motion blur. But I was walking. It was daytime. I had looked directly at it. I had seen it move. I had seen the bird like legs and the head bobbing. And then I had reached the exact place where it disappeared and found nothing. For the rest of the walk, I felt unsettled. Not terrified exactly, but unable to relax. Every dark object near the woods caught my attention. A black trash bag near a driveway looked strange until I got closer. A crow flying out of a tree made me jump, even though it was a normal-sized bird. A shadow near a pile of lumber made me stop and stare longer than I should have. I kept replaying what I had seen. The size was the part I could not get past. It was not just a black bird. It was the size of a vehicle, maybe not literally as large as a box truck. Maybe my mind exaggerated the scale because of the angle, the distance, or the sudden movement. Maybe it was closer than I thought, which made it look much larger. Maybe part of the vehicle itself blended into the shape and made the bird seem enormous. That would make sense. The human brain is not perfect at judging size, especially when something appears unexpectedly. You can see an animal at an odd angle and misread how far away it is. A crow close to you can look much larger than it really is. A turkey or vulture moving behind a dark truck could become something far more disturbing in your memory. I have tried to explain it that way. Maybe it was a turkey. Wild turkeys can look strange. They have long legs, dark feathers, and a head-bobbing walk. In the right light, especially near construction equipment and shadows, one could look bigger than expected. But it did not look like a turkey. It did not have the rounded body shape I associate with one. It seemed taller, thinner, and more towering. Its movement was slower and more deliberate. The blackness of it looked too complete, like the figure had been cut out of the shadows. Maybe it was a large crow or raven. But even the biggest raven would not look like that. Not that large, not with that scale, and not so close to a residential street. Maybe it was an optical illusion. A shadow falling across the vehicle and part of the house. A reflection in a window. A dark tarp moving in the wind. A worker in black clothing carrying something, with the rest of the shape created by the truck behind them. That is probably the most reasonable answer. I saw a few separate things at once, and my mind combined them into one enormous bird-like creature. Brains do that. They make patterns quickly, especially when we catch movement out of the corner of our eye. We are built to notice shapes and turn them into familiar things. Sometimes we see a face in a wall, a person in a coat hanging on a door, or an animal in a cluster of branches. Maybe I saw a construction tarp shifting. Maybe the truck, the trees, and a bird all lined up for 1 second. Maybe my mind did the rest. But there is a problem with that explanation too. I remember the head bobbing. I remember watching it take steps. I remember the legs. I remember the movement behind the vehicle. It did not appear as one still shape that I misunderstood. It walked, and I watched it long enough to pull up my camera and head toward it. I still wish I had taken the picture faster. I keep thinking that maybe, if I had simply lifted my phone and pointed it immediately, I would have captured something. Maybe it would have shown a turkey, a shadow, a person, a tarp, or nothing at all. Any answer would have been better than the empty space I found. Instead, I have only the memory. A massive black bird-like figure moving behind a construction vehicle. Bird legs, a bobbing head, a size that made no sense. Then, nothing. I did not tell many people at first. It sounds ridiculous when you put it into words. You can say, "I saw a huge bird," and people will assume you are exaggerating. You can say it was the size of a box truck, and people will laugh or assume you were joking. I do not blame them. I would probably react the same way if someone told me that story. I would ask whether they were tired, stressed, drinking, or seeing something from a distance. I would wonder whether it was a turkey or a large vulture. I would look for the normal explanation before considering anything else. And that is exactly what I have done to myself. I have thought about every possible normal explanation. I have tried to imagine what objects might have been behind the vehicle. I have thought about how the shadows looked that day. I have wondered whether I had an eye issue in that moment. I have wondered whether I was more tired than I realized. I have wondered whether I had just caught a strange combination of movement and light. But the memory is still there. It did not feel like a vague flash. It felt physical. It felt present. It was close enough that I thought I could walk toward it and photograph it. That is why the empty space bothered me so much. If it had flown away, I would have heard wings. If it had run into the woods, I might have seen branches move. If it had been a normal animal, it would have left some clue that it existed. But when I reached the truck, there was no sign of anything. The space behind it was too ordinary. That is one of the weirdest feelings I have ever had, walking toward something you are certain you saw, then arriving and finding that the place is completely empty. It makes you doubt your own eyes. You start questioning the exact moment you saw it. You wonder whether you looked for too long or not long enough. You wonder whether the thing was ever where you thought it was. You wonder whether the movement began in the physical world and ended somewhere in your mind. I do not know. I never saw anything like it again. I have walked my dog through that area many times since then. The construction eventually ended. The houses were finished. New families moved in. Driveways filled with cars. Lawns grew in. The empty lots became regular yards. The neighborhood became normal. But whenever I pass that particular area, I still look. I look behind vehicles. I look at the tree line. I look at the spaces between houses. Sometimes I see normal crows, black and small against the sky. Sometimes I see turkeys farther back near the woods. Sometimes I see nothing but a quiet road and houses where people are living ordinary lives. But there has never been another giant black figure. Never another huge bird-like thing moving with that slow head bobbing walk. Never another moment where I thought I was looking at something impossible. That should make it easier to dismiss. Maybe it was a one-time visual mistake. Maybe nothing unusual happened at all. Maybe I saw something normal in such a strange way that my memory turned it into something frightening. But the fact that it only happened once makes it feel more real in another way. It was not a recurring hallucination. It was not part of a pattern. It was one afternoon, one walk, one movement in the corner of my eye, and one thing that should not have been there. I still do not know what I saw. I do not think I will ever know. Maybe it was a bird. Maybe it was construction equipment. Maybe it was a trick of distance and shadow. Maybe it was something my mind made out of an ordinary shape because it appeared suddenly and disappeared before I could verify it. But whenever I remember that day, I do not remember the unfinished houses first. I do not remember the sunlight, the quiet street, or my dog pulling at the leash. I remember that giant black shape moving behind the vehicle. I remember the long bird-like legs. I remember the head dipping and rising. And I remember opening my camera, walking closer, and finding absolutely nothing there. We had a hallway on the second floor at the top of the stairs. It was not very large, but it connected everything upstairs. The 2 bedrooms opened off that small hallway, and the bathroom was directly nearby. During the day, it was completely normal. It was just a narrow upstairs space with doors, walls, carpet, and the usual faint smell of laundry, shampoo, and whatever had been cooked downstairs earlier. At night, it felt different. The stairs led up from the main floor and ended almost directly beneath the hallway ceiling. If you came up in the dark, the first thing you noticed was the smoke detector mounted above the bathroom door. It had a small red LED light that blinked from time to time. During the day, you barely paid attention to it. At night, it seemed brighter than it should have been. We kept fresh batteries in it. That was important, because the first time it started acting strange, I assumed it must be the battery. Smoke detectors beep when the battery is low. Everyone knows that sound. One short, sharp chirp every so often, usually at the worst possible time. Usually in the middle of the night when the house is quiet and every sound seems louder. But this detector did not behave like a normal low battery detector. It would only beep when someone got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. Not every time. Not during the day. Not when we walked under it in the evening. It only seemed to happen when the house was asleep and one of us had gotten out of bed, half awake, to pee. You would be walking down the hall in the dark, trying not to wake anyone, and just as you stepped directly beneath the detector, it would let out one short, violent sound. Peep. It was always sharp enough to make you jump. The first few times it happened, I laughed it off. I would mutter something about needing to replace the battery, even though the battery was fresh. Sometimes I would stand beneath it afterward, looking up at the little white plastic circle on the ceiling, waiting for it to do it again. It never did. That was the strange part. It would only give that one chirp when you were directly under it. Then it would go quiet for hours. The next day, it would behave perfectly normally. The red LED would blink the way it was supposed to. There would be no warning sound, no indication of a battery issue, nothing that suggested anything was wrong. I told myself it had to be coincidence. Maybe the detector was sensitive to temperature changes. Maybe warm air from the bathroom drifted up toward it whenever someone opened the door. Maybe the old wiring in the house did something strange at night. Maybe the battery was not as fresh as we thought. Or maybe the detector itself was beginning to fail. All of those things were possible. Still, it became a running annoyance. I began expecting it every time I got up at night. There is a special kind of fear that comes from waiting for a sound you know is coming. You start walking more slowly. You look up at the detector before you pass beneath it. You almost hold your breath, hoping that this time it will stay quiet. Sometimes it would. That made it worse, somehow, because then you would relax. You would think maybe it had stopped doing it. Then the next night, just when you were directly underneath it, it would snap out another sharp little chirp and send a shock through your entire body. It never sounded like a normal low battery warning. A low battery beep has a rhythm to it. It repeats after a certain amount of time. It is irritating, but predictable. This was not predictable. It felt timed. I hated that thought as soon as I had it. I did not want to give it a personality. I did not want to treat a faulty smoke detector like it was watching people walk below it. That was stupid. It was an object on the ceiling. It had a battery, a sensor, and a little lead. Nothing more. But when you are exhausted at 3 in the morning and an object makes a sharp sound exactly as you pass below it, your brain does not always stay rational. One night, I had reached my limit. I had gotten out of bed to use the bathroom. The house was dark. My boyfriend was asleep in the bedroom, and I was trying to move quietly. I remember the upstairs hallway being almost completely black, except for the faint red blink from the detector and a little bit of dim light coming from outside through a window. I stepped out of the bedroom. The floor creaked softly. I walked down the hallway. And just as I passed beneath the smoke detector, it gave its usual short, sharp beep. Peep! I jumped so hard I nearly swore out loud. That night, instead of just hurrying to the bathroom and pretending it had not happened, I stopped. I was irritated, I was tired, and I was genuinely sick of it. I stood directly beneath the detector and looked up at it. The little red LED blinked once. The house was silent. I remember feeling ridiculous, but I was annoyed enough that I spoke to it anyway. "Go on," I said quietly. "Do it again. I dare you." For a second, nothing happened. I was still looking up at the detector. Then the red LED blinked. Once, twice, 3 times. Not the usual slow blink it gave during the day. These were quick, distinct flashes in a row. Then it made one long, sustained sound. Peep. It was louder than the normal chirp. Longer, sharp enough that it seemed to fill the whole hallway. Every hair on my body stood straight up. I did not wait to see if it would do anything else. I did not inspect it. I did not get a chair and check the battery. I did not stand there trying to convince myself it was an electrical fault. I ran back into the bedroom. I got under the covers as quickly as I could, heart pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I remember lying there in the dark, trying to be quiet so I would not wake my boyfriend, while every part of me was tense and waiting for another sound from the hallway. Nothing happened. The detector went completely silent after that. Of course, the rational part of me knew there could have been an explanation. Maybe I had not noticed the LED blinking normally. Maybe the detector had entered some kind of testing mode. Maybe there was a bad connection. Maybe I had accidentally caused a change in airflow by moving close to it. Maybe the battery or wiring was failing in a way that happened to line up with my stupid little challenge. But none of those explanations made the timing feel less unnerving. It had beeped just as I walked under it. I had looked directly at it and told it to do it again. Then it blinked 3 times and let out a long, angry-sounding tone. I never spoke to it again. The upstairs hallway was not the only part of that place that made me uneasy. The main floor was laid out in a way that made sound travel strangely. The house was mostly square, with the kitchen taking up about 1/4 of the space. The rest of the main floor formed an L-shaped dining and living area. You could be sitting in the living room and hear someone moving in the kitchen, even if you could not see them. Sounds from the dining area seemed to carry in an odd way, especially when the house was otherwise quiet. There was a pendant lamp hanging over the dining table. It was a normal hanging light, the kind suspended from the ceiling by a cord or chain. It was low enough that I had accidentally hit my head on it before. Whenever that happened, the lamp would swing back and forth for a while, moving more dramatically than you might expect. You would see the glass or metal shade move in a slow arc over the table. That was normal. You hit it, it swung. You brushed against it while reaching across the table, it swung. A strong draft might make it move slightly, but it never swung hard on its own. One night, I was downstairs on the sofa, finishing a project on my laptop. I do not remember exactly what the project was. It may have been schoolwork, something for a job, or some kind of personal task I had put off until late. I had headphones on, listening to music while I worked. My boyfriend had already gone upstairs to bed. The house had that late-night quiet to it. The refrigerator was running in the kitchen. The baseboard heater clicked occasionally as it heated up and cooled down. The laptop keys made soft tapping sounds when I typed. Everything else was still. I was focused on the screen and barely aware of the room around me. My headphones blocked out most of the house sounds. The music was playing low enough that I could still hear some things if they were loud. But mostly I was in my own little world, finishing whatever I needed to finish before going upstairs. Then I felt a cool draft. It was not a strong gust. It was just enough to make the skin on my arms tighten. At first, I thought the heat had turned off. Then I thought maybe a vent was blowing differently. The house was old enough, or at least drafty enough, that a small cold current was not impossible. But it felt unusual because I was sitting still. The cool air moved across the side of my face and neck. At almost the same time, I thought I heard someone say something. It was faint, so faint that I could not make out the words. At first, I assumed it was part of the music. Maybe there was a vocal track between songs, or maybe some sound had leaked through from my headphones in a strange way. I kept typing for another second, then paused. The sound came again, not clearly enough to understand, but it sounded like a voice. I pulled my headphones off. The house became quiet in a different way. Without the music, I could hear the refrigerator running. I could hear the baseboard heater ticking and clicking. I could hear the small mechanical sounds of the house settling around me. For a few seconds, that was all. Then I heard whispering, not from outside, not from a neighbor, not from upstairs. It seemed to be coming from the dining table area. I froze. At first, I thought maybe my boyfriend had come downstairs. Maybe he had woken up and was talking on his phone. But there was no sound of anyone coming down the stairs, no footsteps, no light switching on, no movement in the kitchen. The whispering continued. It was quiet, but it was close. It sounded like more than one voice, though I could not make out individual words. It was the kind of soft, overlapping murmur you hear when people are talking in another room, with the door mostly closed. Except nobody should have been there. I turned toward the dining area. That was when I noticed the pendant lamp. It was swinging, not gently, not the slight movement you would expect from air moving through the house. It was swinging hard enough that I immediately thought of the times I had accidentally hit my head on it. It had that same wide, uneven motion, back and forth over the table, moving in a visible arc. I stared at it. For a second, I honestly could not remember whether it had already been swinging when I took off my headphones. That uncertainty bothered me almost as much as the lamp itself. Had I noticed it before and not registered it? Had the air moved when I pulled the headphones off? Had I bumped something earlier without realizing? Had the lamp been swinging for several minutes while I sat there, focused on my laptop? I did not know. But the whispering was still there. The air around the dining table felt colder than the rest of the room. The lamp kept moving, and the voices sounded as real as the faint, tinny music still leaking from my headphones. Every hair on my body prickled. It was the same physical feeling I had gotten upstairs under the smoke detector, but stronger. The sudden rush of cold through your arms, the tightening in your chest, the instinctive certainty that you are not supposed to be where you are. I did not investigate. I did not get up and walk toward the dining table. I did not call out to ask if someone was there. I grabbed my laptop and moved. I got up from the sofa so fast that I almost left things behind. I remember rushing toward the stairs, hearing the whispering for another second behind me, and refusing to look back at the dining room. I ran upstairs. I do not mean I hurried. I ran. I took the stairs 2 at a time and went straight into the bedroom. I dove into bed beside my boyfriend, who was still asleep. I was breathing hard. My hands were shaking. I tried to get under the blankets quietly, but I was too wound up. He woke up. "Holy shit, what's up?" he said, still half asleep. I remember him sounding groggy and annoyed at first, as though he thought I had come upstairs because of some ordinary problem. Then he looked at me. It was dark in the room, but apparently my face said enough. His voice changed. "Oh my God," he said. "Are you okay?" I was still trying to catch my breath. "Yeah," I said. "I heard something weird downstairs." That was all I could manage. I did not want to explain the lamp right away. I did not want to describe the whispering. I did not want to say that I had been sitting alone, listening to music, and then suddenly felt cold air, heard voices from the dining table, and saw the pendant lamp swinging as though someone had hit it. My boyfriend was quiet for a moment, then, half asleep and clearly not interested in going downstairs to investigate, he muttered, "Man, this place is fucking haunted." Then he rolled over and went back to sleep. I lay there awake for a long time. Part of me was annoyed that he could fall asleep so easily. Another part of me was grateful he had not made me describe it in detail. If he had asked questions, I might have had to say the words out loud, and that would have made it feel more real. Instead, I stared into the darkness and listened. I listened for footsteps on the stairs. I listened for the pendant lamp hitting the table. I listened for voices drifting up from downstairs. I listened for the smoke detector to chirp outside the bedroom door. Nothing happened. The house was quiet. Eventually, I convinced myself that there had to be ordinary explanations. The draft could have come from a vent or an open window. The whispering could have been something outside, or perhaps a sound from the refrigerator, heater, or plumbing that my brain interpreted as voices after I took my headphones off. The lamp could have been moving because of air currents, vibrations, or some subtle shift in the house. Maybe a truck had passed outside. Maybe the heating system had kicked on. Maybe I had brushed it earlier and forgotten. All of that was possible, but I could not make the pieces fit comfortably. The whispering sounded too close. The lamp was moving too hard. The cold draft came at the same time, and I had not been in a dark room trying to sleep. I was awake, focused on my laptop, with music in my ears. I had not gone into the night expecting something strange. The strange thing had interrupted me. After that, I became more careful when I was downstairs alone at night. I did not stop using the living room. I did not refuse to sit at the dining table. I did not move out immediately or start treating every noise like a sign of something supernatural. But I was more aware. I noticed the pendant lamp every time I passed beneath it. I watched it after the heater came on. I paid attention to whether it moved when doors opened or closed. I listened more closely to the sounds of the refrigerator and the baseboard heater, trying to learn which noises belonged to the house and which ones did not. I never heard the whispering that clearly again. The lamp did not swing on its own in front of me after that night. The smoke detector continued to behave strangely from time to time, though I never challenged it again. Maybe the place was haunted. Maybe it was full of ordinary faults that became frightening because of timing, exhaustion, and the way old houses sound at night. Maybe the detector had a failing circuit. Maybe the pendant lamp had been caught in a draft. Maybe the whispering was nothing more than a sound carrying from outside, distorted through windows and walls. I cannot prove otherwise, but I still remember how it felt. I remember standing in the upstairs hallway, looking up at that detector after it chirped beneath me. I remember saying, "Go on, do it again. I dare you." I remember the red LED blinking 3 times, and I remember the long, sharp tone that followed. More than that, I remember sitting on the sofa downstairs, pulling my headphones off because I thought I heard someone speak. I remember the quiet click of the heater, the running refrigerator, the cold draft across my skin, the pendant light swinging over the dining table, the whispering voices that seemed to come from the empty space around it. And I remember racing upstairs so fast that my boyfriend woke up, looked at my face, and immediately knew something was wrong. He called the place haunted and went back to sleep. At the time, I think I agreed with him. Every year, a bunch of my friends and I rented a lake house for a week so we could get away, party, and spend time together somewhere quiet. It had become a tradition for us. We would all throw money in, find a place big enough for everyone, load up cars with food, drinks, bags, speakers, towels, and random things nobody really needed, then disappear for a few days. The lake house changed from year to year, but the routine was always similar. During the day, we would hang around by the water, swim, cook outside, play games, sit on the dock, or take turns acting like we were going to be productive before giving up and opening another drink. At night, we would sit around fires, play music, tell stories, and stay up far later than anyone planned. It was always messy, loud, and fun. The kind of trip where nobody sleeps enough, everyone loses track of what day it is, and by the end of the week, you are exhausted in the best possible way. One year, we rented a house on a lake in New Hampshire. It was a nice place, not some rundown cabin with a broken porch and an old canoe tied to a tree. It was a proper lake house, with enough room for everyone and a view of the water that made the whole trip feel better the second we got there. The lake was calm during the day and almost completely black at night. That was one of the things I remember most about the place. During the daytime, the water reflected the sky, the trees, the boats, and the sunlight. You could see ripples moving across it and hear people talking from other docks if the wind carried the sound the right way. But at night, it became something else. The lake turned into a dark, flat space stretching away from the house. You could not see the far edge clearly. You could see a few distant lights from other homes or docks across the water, but most of the surface disappeared into the darkness. The sky was clearer there than it was back home too. Away from a city, away from street lights and parking lots, the stars seemed brighter. You could sit outside and actually see them, instead of looking up at a washed-out orange sky with only a handful of visible points. That was probably why we noticed the light. It was late one night, and a few of us were sitting in the hot tub outside. There were maybe 5 of us in there. We had been drinking for a while, not just casually. We were drunk enough that everyone was relaxed, talking too loudly, laughing at stupid things, and losing track of conversations halfway through them. The hot tub had become the place everyone ended up once the party inside started winding down. Someone would say they were going out there for a few minutes. Then someone else would join them. Then another person would come out with a drink. Before long, half the group would be sitting in steaming water under the night sky, talking about things that felt deep at the time, but probably made no sense the next morning. The air was cold outside. That made the hot tub feel even better. Steam rose off the water and drifted upward around us. The contrast between the warm water and the cold air made every exposed part of your body feel freezing. Our shoulders were cold. Our faces were cold. But the rest of us were almost too warm. There was music coming faintly from inside the house, not loud enough to ruin the quiet outside, but enough that you could hear the bass through the walls and occasional lyrics when the door opened. Every so often, someone would come outside, say something to us, then go back in. But for the most part, it was just the 5 of us. The lake, the trees, the cold air, the stars. At some point, one of my buddies looked up and pointed at the sky. He said something about a star. At first, nobody really paid attention. When you are drunk in a hot tub with friends, someone pointing at a star does not automatically seem important. People point at satellites, planes, constellations, and random lights all the time. Someone probably made a joke about him being too drunk to identify the moon. But he kept pointing. He said, "No, look at that one." So we looked. There was one light in the sky that was brighter than the rest. It was not moving. At least, not that we could tell. It was just sitting there. It looked like a star at first, but it was brighter than the surrounding stars. It did not flash like an airplane. It did not blink red or green. It did not move across the sky like a satellite. It was just there, a single bright point in the dark. Someone said it might be a planet. That was the most reasonable answer. Sometimes Venus or Jupiter can look ridiculously bright, especially when the sky is clear. It can seem strange if you are not expecting it. A planet can look brighter than every star around it and stay perfectly still in the same place. So we watched it for a minute. At first, nothing happened. The light stayed where it was. People started talking again. Someone leaned back against the edge of the hot tub. Someone else took a drink. The conversation drifted towards something else. Then the light began to change. It started getting brighter, not all at once. Slowly at first. The white point in the sky seemed to grow more intense. It did not move closer in the usual sense, because there was no way to judge distance, but it became more noticeable. It started to stand out against the darkness in a way it had not before. My buddy pointed again. "Do you see that?" This time, everyone looked. The light was definitely brighter. I remember thinking maybe it was an aircraft coming directly toward us. That was my first real explanation. If a plane was flying toward you head-on, it might appear stationary for a while. It would not move left or right much, because it would be coming straight toward your line of sight. Its lights could grow brighter as it got closer. That made sense. But this did not look like a plane. There were no blinking navigation lights. No red, no green, no pattern. It was just a growing white light. Someone said maybe it was a helicopter. Someone else said maybe it was a drone, but it was too high, too far away, and too still. We sat there watching it. The mood in the hot tub changed. At first it was funny. We were all joking about it. One person said it was an alien. Someone else said it was probably a star exploding. Another person said they were too drunk for this. But as it grew brighter, the jokes became quieter. The light became intense. It was still not lighting up the whole sky or anything dramatic like that, but it no longer looked like a normal star. It looked too bright, too concentrated, like someone had turned a spotlight toward us from very far away. Then it did something none of us expected. The single bright circle split into three, not three separate lights slowly emerging over time. It divided into three bright circles. They appeared in a perfect triangle. All three lights were the same general brightness. They were evenly spaced, or close enough that it looked deliberate. One was higher, with two lower lights beneath it, making a clear triangle shape. The second it happened, the whole hot tub went quiet. Nobody had a joke ready. Nobody said it was a plane anymore. None of the lights were moving. That was the part that was so strange. They were not drifting apart. They were not spinning. They were not rising or falling. They were not moving left or right across the sky. They just hung there. Three bright circles in a perfect triangle. I remember looking from one to the other, trying to make sense of the shape. If it had been a plane, maybe the lights had changed angle. If it had been a helicopter, maybe we were seeing multiple lights from it. If it had been drones, maybe they were flying in formation. But none of those explanations really worked. The lights were too still. And the way the original light seemed to split, was too strange. It was like one thing had become three. Someone in the hot tub asked if anyone had a phone. Of course, people had phones, but nobody had been holding one ready. We were in water, drunk, cold above the shoulders, and staring at something that had suddenly stopped feeling funny. One person probably reached for their phone, but I do not remember anyone getting a clear video. Maybe somebody tried, and the camera could not pick it up. Maybe nobody even thought to record it fast enough. That is one of the things people always ask afterward. Did you get it on video? No, not in any useful way. When something strange happens, you do not always react logically. You do not immediately think about proof. You stare. You freeze. You wait to see what happens next because your brain is still trying to decide whether you are actually seeing what you think you are seeing. That is what we did. We stared at the three circles. They got brighter, not dramatically at first, but enough that you could see the difference. The three lights intensified together. They all brightened as though connected somehow. None of them changed position. The triangle stayed perfect. The darkness around them stayed completely still. I remember feeling the water around me suddenly less warm. That is probably just fear. When something makes you nervous, your body notices everything differently. The cold air feels colder. The steam feels thinner. The trees behind you look darker. The sounds from inside the house seem farther away. The people in the hot tub were getting freaked out. The girls especially were uncomfortable. I do not mean that as a joke or a stereotype. Everyone was uneasy, but some people reached the point where they did not want to sit outside watching anymore. One person said we should go inside. Another said, "Yeah, screw this." Nobody argued. That was when I knew it had gone beyond a weird light in the sky. Normally, a group of drunk friends will stay outside for anything. We would have watched a meteor shower. We would have stood there in the cold to see lightning in the distance. We would have laughed at some strange plane or satellite. But this felt different. There was no movement, no sound, no obvious explanation. Just three lights hanging over the lake. We climbed out of the hot tub. That should have been a funny, chaotic process, because getting out of a hot tub in cold air when you are drunk is usually miserable. You scramble for towels, everyone complains about freezing, someone almost slips, and people laugh while trying to get inside. But nobody was laughing much. We grabbed towels and went into the house. I remember the door closing behind us. The warm indoor air hit us, and suddenly the whole thing felt even stranger, because we were no longer looking at it. The lights were outside, somewhere above the lake, but now we were inside, with the curtains, walls, lamps, and noise from the rest of the house. People started talking again. Everyone had seen it. That was important. It was not one person claiming they had noticed something in the sky. There were 5 of us in the hot tub. We all saw the bright point. We all saw it get larger and brighter. We all saw it split into 3 circles in a triangle. We started comparing what we remembered. Did it split? Did you see how still it was? Why didn't it move? Was that a plane? No way that was a plane. Someone wanted to look outside again. Someone else said no. I do not remember whether we eventually went back out. I think we may have looked through a window or stepped onto the porch later, but by then, the lights were gone. They did not fly away. They did not streak across the sky. They did not fade one after another. They disappeared together. All 3 at the same time. That was another detail that stuck with me. They had brightened together. They had stayed still together. Then, they disappeared together, like someone had turned them off. For years afterward, I tried to think of a normal explanation. The best one I came up with was a meteor. Maybe it was a meteor coming directly toward us. If it had been moving directly along our line of sight, It might have looked stationary. As it approached, it could have become brighter. If it fragmented into 3 pieces, maybe the fragments could have formed a triangle shape. That is possible, at least in theory. I am not an expert in astronomy or atmospheric phenomena. I know that things in the sky can look completely different, depending on angle, distance, cloud cover, and whether they are coming toward you or moving away from you. A meteor can break apart. A satellite can flare. Aircraft can appear stationary from certain angles. Drones can form shapes. Lights can reflect strangely through thin clouds. Maybe there were 3 aircraft at different distances that happened to line up. Maybe the original bright light was not one object at all. Maybe our eyes could not separate the lights until they got brighter. There are probably explanations I have never considered, but none of them have ever felt completely satisfying. A meteor usually moves. Even if it were coming toward us, I would expect some visible change. I would expect it to get bigger, then pass or disappear with some kind of streak. And a meteor breaking into 3 pieces might create multiple lights. But the idea of them forming a perfect stationary triangle and then brightening together still feels strange. Drones are another possibility. Maybe someone was flying 3 drones over the lake. Maybe they were far enough away that we could not hear them. Maybe they were part of some kind of event or private property across the water. But this was years ago, and it did not look like normal drones. They were too high and too bright. And again, the way one light appeared to become 3 was hard to explain. A plane or helicopter does not fit either. They have navigation lights. They move. They make sound eventually, especially if they are bright enough to be noticeable. These lights did not. They just sat there, silent, perfectly placed. Watching, almost. I do not mean that literally. I do not think the lights were alive. But that was how it felt at the time, like something had noticed us looking. The more we watched, the brighter it became. Then it divided. Then it held that impossible shape. Then it disappeared when we finally decided to get inside. That sequence is probably why it became the oddest experience I have ever had. If it had only been a bright star, I would have forgotten it. If it had only been one strange light moving through the sky, I could have called it a satellite or a plane. If it had only been a meteor, I could have explained the flash. But it was the 3 lights that stayed with me. The triangle, the stillness, the way every one of us watched it happen. I have seen plenty of things in the sky since then. I have seen satellites moving in straight lines. I have seen planes that looked strange from far away. I have seen meteor showers. I have seen bright planets and stars that made people stop and point. Nothing has looked like that. Nothing has held completely still, grown brighter, split into 3 equal circles, formed a perfect triangle, and then vanished all at once. I do not tell the story like I know what it was. I do not say it was aliens. I do not say it was definitely some unknown craft. I do not say it was a supernatural sign or a government experiment or anything else people might attach to a strange light in the sky. I just know that 5 people saw it. We were drunk, yes, that is true. But being drunk does not make 5 people see the same bright light, then the same triangle, then the same disappearance. It may have made us more emotional about it. It may have made us more likely to get scared. But it did not create the same scene in all our heads. We all saw something. Maybe it had an ordinary explanation. Maybe it was an unusual meteor event. Maybe it was some kind of aircraft or drone formation. Maybe there was a scientific explanation that would sound completely normal to someone who studies the sky. But at the time, sitting in that hot tub beside a dark lake in New Hampshire, It did not feel normal. It felt like the sky had changed. It felt like one star had looked back. And then it became 3. Before the next story begins, thank you for staying here in the dark. If this is your first visit, subscribe to Wickless Night for more true stories made for the late hours, when the world is quiet and every little noise feels important. You can also leave a like and tell me which story has made you look around the room so far. Now, let's continue. Yes, sleep paralysis can include auditory experiences, such as whispers, voices, footsteps, or other sounds, even when the person has no visual hallucinations. These experiences can happen while the brain is partly awake and still in a sleep state, which can make them feel extremely real. Since your episodes are recurring, it would be sensible to mention them to a clinician if they become more frequent, make you afraid to sleep, or come with major daytime sleepiness or other unusual sleep symptoms. NH.UK. Here is the expanded rewrite. I have had sleep paralysis episodes about 2 or 3 times a year for as long as I can remember. They started when I was little. At first, I did not know what they were. I only knew that sometimes I would wake up and be unable to move. My eyes would be open, or at least I would feel like they were open, and I would be aware of my bedroom around me. I could see the ceiling. I could hear the faint sounds of the house. I could think normally enough to know something was wrong. But I could not move. I could not sit up. I could not turn my head. I could not lift an arm or call out. When I was younger, it scared me badly. There is something deeply frightening about waking up in your own room and realizing that your body is not responding. Your mind starts racing immediately. You try to move one finger. You try to blink harder. You try to force a sound out of your throat. You try to make yourself sit up, but nothing happens. It feels like you are trapped inside yourself. When you are a child, you do not have the words for it. You do not know that it has a name. You do not know that other people experience it too. You just know that you are lying in bed, awake, but not awake, unable to move while time seems to stretch out far longer than it probably is. As I got older, I started understanding what it was. Sleep paralysis. Once I knew the name, it became easier to deal with. Not pleasant, never pleasant, but easier. I learned that the episodes would pass. They always did. I learned not to fight against it too hard, because panicking only made the experience feel longer. If I tried to force myself awake, I would become more terrified. My breathing would feel strange. My chest would tighten. I would focus on every second that I could not move, and the more I focused on it, the worse it became. Eventually, I developed a routine. When it happened, I would remind myself that it was just sleep paralysis. I would lie there, staring at the ceiling. I would try to relax. I would tell myself that I had been through it before. I would tell myself that it was temporary. I would focus on breathing slowly, even if it felt difficult. I would wait for the feeling to leave. Sometimes I would try to move something small, like a finger or a toe. Sometimes I would simply wait until my body caught up with my mind. Over time, I got used to it. Not completely, because no one ever really gets used to waking up unable to move. But I stopped treating every episode like an emergency. I stopped thinking I was dying. I stopped feeling like I needed to figure out what was happening in the moment. I would just stare at the ceiling and ride it out. The strange part was that I never had the kind of experiences that many people describe during sleep paralysis. I had heard stories about dark figures standing in bedrooms. People see shadows in corners. They see something at the foot of the bed. They feel pressure on their chest. They describe a presence in the room, something watching them, something moving toward them, something they cannot explain. I never saw any of that. Not once. No shadow person. No dark figure. No face in the corner. No creature standing over me. Nothing during my episodes. The room was always just my room. I would see the ceiling, the walls, the familiar shapes of furniture, and maybe whatever light was coming through the window. It was unsettling because I could not move, but visually, everything seemed normal. That became part of why I was able to stay calm. I knew what to expect. I would wake up. I would realize I could not move. I would lie there and wait. Then it would end. It was annoying more than anything else. Sometimes I would wake up afterward and feel irritated because I had been pulled out of sleep. Sometimes I would be tired the next day. Sometimes I would lie there for a while after it ended, staring at the ceiling and trying to decide whether I wanted to go back to sleep or stay awake for a few minutes. But I never thought much about it. It had become a fairly common part of my life. 2 or 3 times a year, something I had learned to manage. Then earlier this year, I had an episode that felt completely different from the others. At the time, I was living alone. That detail mattered because there was nobody else in the apartment. No roommate in the next room. No partner asleep beside me. No one watching television in the living room. No neighbor inside the apartment making noise. No one who could have been playing a joke or whispering outside my bedroom door. It was just me. My apartment was quiet that night. I do not remember exactly what time it was when I fell asleep. It may have been later than usual, but it was not one of those nights where I had been drinking heavily or doing anything that would make me think I had caused the episode myself. I went to bed normally. I had the usual things around me. My room was familiar. My closet door was there. My bed was where it always was. Nothing felt unusual before I fell asleep. At some point during the night, I woke up. Or at least I thought I woke up. I was lying on my back, face up. My head was tilted slightly to the left. I remember that detail clearly because it became important almost immediately. My body was positioned in a way that made me feel like I should have been able to turn my head easily. I was not pinned under a blanket. I was not lying awkwardly. I was simply on my back, with my head angled slightly left toward one side of the room. Then I realized I could not move. At first I panicked. That was automatic. Even after years of having sleep paralysis, the first few seconds are always frightening. Your body wakes before your ability to control it does, and your mind reacts like something terrible has happened. I tried to move my arms. Nothing. I tried to shift my shoulders. Nothing. I tried to turn my head. Nothing. For a brief moment, I felt that familiar rush of fear. My heart started pounding. My thoughts jumped ahead of me. I had the old feeling of being trapped in place, unable to do anything except stare upward and wait. Then I reminded myself what it was. Sleep paralysis. Just another episode. I had been through this before. It was harmless. It would pass. I tried to calm down. I focused on my breathing. I kept my eyes open and looked at the ceiling. I told myself not to fight it. I told myself that in a few moments or a few minutes, I would be able to move again. The apartment was silent. I could hear the usual faint sounds that every apartment makes at night. Maybe the refrigerator cycling somewhere in the kitchen. Maybe a pipe making a tiny sound in the wall. Maybe distant traffic outside. Nothing unusual. I started to settle down. Then I heard a woman whisper directly into my right ear. It was not a faint sound from across the room. It was not something that seemed far away. It was right beside me. right at my right ear. The voice was close enough that it felt impossible to mistake for something else. It sounded like a woman was leaning over the side of the bed, close to my head, whispering directly into my ear. The words did not make sense. It was not English. It was not a phrase I recognized. It sounded like fast, whispered gibberish, something like Ashnovusnash Dickon. It came in one quick rush, soft but clear, close but impossible. I froze in a way that was different from the paralysis. Before that, I had been calm enough to accept what was happening. I had told myself it was another normal episode. I had been prepared to lie still and wait it out. But the whisper destroyed that calm immediately. Every part of me went cold. I wanted to turn my head to the right. More than anything, I wanted to see what was there. I wanted to look at the side of the bed. I wanted to see whether someone had somehow gotten into the apartment. I wanted to see whether there was a person crouched beside me, a shadow on the wall, a reflection, anything that could explain the voice, but I could not move. My head was still tilted left. The whisper had come from the right, and I could not turn toward it. That was the most frightening part. If I had been able to move, I probably would have sat up immediately. I would have turned on the light, checked the room, checked the apartment, looked behind the door, and searched every corner. I would have found some kind of explanation, or at least reassured myself that nobody was there, but I was trapped in the same position, unable to move, unable to turn, unable to speak. All I could do was stare at the ceiling and listen. For a few seconds after the whisper, everything went silent. That almost made it worse. I waited for the voice to come again. I waited for it to say something clearer. I waited for a hand to touch my shoulder. I waited for footsteps. I waited for breathing. Nothing happened. The room stayed still, but I was no longer calm. My heart was pounding so hard that I could feel it in my chest and throat. I tried to tell myself that it was part of sleep paralysis. I had read enough stories to know that people could hear things during those episodes. Some people hear footsteps, some hear their names, some hear voices or whispering. Some hear someone speaking from the corner of the room. I knew that, at least in theory. But knowing it and experiencing it were two different things. The sound had felt too real. It had not sounded like a dream. It had not sounded distant or distorted. It sounded like a person was right beside me, and it was only in my right ear. That detail stayed with me. It was not as though I heard a voice somewhere in the room. It did not echo. It did not come from the hallway or outside the apartment. It was one-sided, direct, and close. I desperately tried to move. I focused on my right hand first. Nothing. Then I tried to move my fingers. Nothing. I tried to shift my jaw or force a sound from my throat. Nothing. I tried to tell myself to relax, but fear had completely taken over. I was no longer just waiting for sleep paralysis to end. I was waiting to find out whether the voice would come back. Time became strange. I do not know how long the episode lasted. It may have been seconds. It may have been minutes. In sleep paralysis, time never feels normal. A short moment can feel like a long stretch of terror because you are fully focused on the fact that you cannot move. I remember staring at the ceiling and trying to count breaths. I remember listening to the silence. I remember thinking that there was no way anyone else could be in the apartment. I had locked the door. I lived alone. There should have been no woman beside my bed. There should have been no voice in my ear. Eventually, the paralysis ended. At first, it happened the way it usually does. I felt a small return of control. Maybe I could move my fingers. Maybe I could shift one arm. Then I was able to move more fully. I sat up. I turned toward the right side of the bed as fast as I could. There was nothing there. No person, no shadow, no sign that anyone had been beside me. The room was exactly as I remembered it. The furniture was in place. The floor was empty. The walls were still. The apartment was quiet. For a moment, I just sat there breathing hard. I did not turn on the light immediately. I do not know why. Maybe I was afraid of what I might see. Maybe the darkness felt safer because it kept the room the way it had been during the episode. Turning on the light would make everything clear, and part of me was not ready for that. Eventually, I reached for my phone or the lamp and checked the room properly. Nothing. I checked the bedroom door. Nothing. I listened for movement elsewhere in the apartment. Nothing. Then I noticed the closet door. It was half open. Not fully open. Not shut. Just open enough to make it noticeable. I stood there looking at it for a while. I could not remember whether I had closed it before going to bed. That was the frustrating part. If I knew I had shut it, then seeing it half open would have made the whole thing worse. It would have felt like something had happened after I fell asleep. But I honestly could not remember. Maybe I had left it like that earlier. Maybe I had been tired. Maybe I had changed clothes, shut the closet halfway, and forgotten. That was completely possible. Still, after hearing a woman whisper directly into my ear while I could not move, the half-open closet door did not feel like a meaningless detail. It felt like part of the room had changed. I did not find anything inside the closet. There was no one hiding there, no sign of forced entry, no object that had fallen. No reason for the door to be open other than the possibility that I had left it that way. I checked the apartment. The front door was locked. The windows were closed. Everything was normal. By then, I was awake enough to think more rationally about it. I told myself it was auditory sleep paralysis. That was the most likely explanation. I had sleep paralysis regularly. I had already experienced the physical part of it many times. The fact that I had never seen visual figures did not mean I could not hear something during an episode. My brain was in that strange space between sleep and waking. It could have created a sound that felt perfectly real because part of me was still dreaming. That made sense. It was probably the truth, but it did not make the memory less frightening. The human mind can understand an explanation after the fact and still feel afraid of what happened. I could tell myself it was a sleep-related hallucination. I could remind myself that I was alone. I could point out that the words made no sense and sounded like nonsense because there was no actual person speaking. But I still remembered exactly how close the whisper had felt. There was no gradual build-up. I did not hear a faint noise and wonder what it was. I heard a woman's voice directly in my ear. That is not something you forget easily. After that episode, I became more aware of the position I slept in. I noticed when I was lying on my back. I noticed how often my head tilted to one side. I noticed the closet door before going to bed and tried to make sure it was either fully open or fully shut, just so I would not wake up wondering whether something had changed. I also became more cautious about how I reacted during sleep paralysis. Before that night, I had been almost bored by it. I would wake up, realize what was happening, and wait. After hearing the whisper, I could not approach it the same way. I still tried to stay calm, but there was always a small fear that the next episode would include something else. A voice, a sound, a touch. Something I could not explain. For a while, every time I woke up in the night, I would listen. If I heard the refrigerator, I would tell myself it was the refrigerator. If a pipe clicked, I would tell myself it was the pipes. If a neighbor made noise in the hallway, I would tell myself it was normal apartment life. But there were moments when the silence itself made me nervous. I would remember the whisper. I would remember that I had been alone. And I would remember the terrible frustration of wanting to look toward the sound, but being unable to move my head. I have never had another episode exactly like that one. I still get sleep paralysis sometimes. It still happens a couple of times a year, more or less. The episodes are usually the same as they have always been. I wake up. I cannot move. I stare at the ceiling. I breathe. I wait. Then it passes. No figures. No dark shapes. No woman standing in the room. No voice beside the bed. But that one episode changed the way I think about them. Before, sleep paralysis was something physical. It was a strange, temporary disconnect between my mind and body. It was unpleasant, but familiar. After that, I understood why people become so frightened by it. It is not just the paralysis, it is the way your surroundings can become uncertain. Your bedroom is still your bedroom, but it does not feel fully safe. You are awake, but not fully awake. You hear something, but you do not know whether it is real. You know your body is not working normally, so you begin questioning your senses too. You start asking yourself what you actually heard. Was it a dream? Was it a sound from outside? Was it a neighbor through the wall? Was it a television somewhere nearby? Was it a noise from the building that your mind turned into speech? Or was it entirely inside your own head, created in a moment when you were caught between sleep and waking? I still do not know. The closet door does not help. I know I may have left it open. In fact, that is probably what happened. I was likely tired, changed clothes, and did not bother to close it fully. By the time I woke up, my mind was looking for anything unusual because I had heard that whisper. It is easy to attach meaning to small details after something scares you. A door that is half open becomes suspicious. A shadow in a corner becomes threatening. A normal house sound becomes a voice. I understand that. But when I think back to that night, I do not first remember the closet door. I remember being on my back. I remember my head tilted slightly left. I remember realizing I could not move. I remember calming myself down because I thought it was just another episode. Then I remember the woman's voice in my right ear, the fast whisper, the words that sounded like gibberish, the desperate need to turn my head toward it, and the complete inability to do anything but lie there and wait for it to end. That was the first time sleep paralysis ever truly terrified me. And even now, after all the episodes I have had over the years, that is the one I still think about when I wake up alone in the dark. I made the mistake of going around an abandoned nursing home. It was not something I had planned carefully. I was not a serious urban explorer, and I was not someone who normally went looking for supposedly haunted places. At the time, it just seemed like one of those things people do when they are bored, curious, and convinced that nothing bad can happen in the middle of the day. That was probably the biggest mistake. People always imagine abandoned buildings are scary at night. They picture flashlights, broken windows, dark rooms, and someone getting lost in a hallway with no power. But being inside that nursing home during the day was worse than I think nighttime would have been. At night, darkness makes sense. At night, you expect a place with no electricity to be black inside. You expect every room to be shadowed. You expect to be unable to see far down a corridor. But this was the middle of the day. The sun was bright outside. The sky was clear. Light poured through the windows in the area where I was standing. Dust hung in the air where the sunlight came through, and I could see the outline of the floors, old walls, and scattered pieces of whatever had been left behind. The building had clearly been empty for a long time. It smelled old, not like a normal empty house, but like damp carpet, dust, stale air, and something that had been trapped indoors for years. There was that strange, heavy smell abandoned places get, a mixture of mildew, wet wood, rust, and decay, the kind of smell that clings to your clothes after you leave. The inside had the feeling of a place people had walked away from without ever really saying goodbye to it. There were old hallways, doors that led into rooms where people had once lived, and walls that still looked like they had been painted in soft, comforting colors at some point. Nursing homes are supposed to feel safe. They are supposed to be places where people are cared for, where there are nurses, visitors, meals, television sounds, wheelchairs rolling down halls, and people checking in on one another. This place had none of that. It felt stripped of every normal sign of life. No voices, no footsteps, no humming lights, no television playing somewhere in the distance, no machines running, nothing, just silence. I remember walking through one of the hallways on the main level or one of the lower floors. I cannot remember the exact layout now, but I remember the windows. The hallway I was in had windows letting in daylight. The sun was coming through strongly enough that I could see my own shadow on the floor in places. It should have felt safe. Instead, it made the darker parts of the building feel worse. Because when I looked farther down the hallway, away from the windows, everything became black. Not dim, not shadowy in a normal way. Black, the hallway seemed to disappear into darkness, even though there were windows nearby, and sunlight was filling the area where I stood. It did not make sense to me. I could understand parts of the building being darker than others, especially if rooms were boarded up or if the windows were dirty, but this was different. It looked like the hallway ahead had swallowed the light. I could see the floor near me. I could see doors on either side. I could see light reflecting off broken glass or dust, but farther down, the corridor became a deep, solid darkness. It looked like one of those places where your eyes cannot adjust because there is no light to adjust to. The strange thing was that I could not explain why. There was sunlight outside. There were windows. I was not standing in a basement. I was not underground. Still, the farther halls looked like they were leading into a place where the day could not reach. I stood there for a moment, trying to tell myself it was only the angle of the building. Maybe the light was blocked by walls. Maybe the windows faced the wrong direction. Maybe the trees outside covered part of the hallway. Maybe it was just a trick of contrast. Sometimes when you stand in bright sunlight and look into a darker room, your eyes make the darkness seem deeper than it really is. That had to be it. There had to be a normal explanation. But even after I stood there for a while, the darkness did not seem to change. It did not soften. It did not resolve into a normal hallway after my eyes adjusted. It just stayed black. I was already uncomfortable before I noticed the picture. It was taped to one of the windows. At first I thought it was a random piece of paper someone had left behind. There were other things scattered around the building, old bits of trash, loose papers, broken furniture, things that had probably been moved around by people who came through after the place was abandoned. But when I got closer, I realized it was a photograph. The photo showed 3 children sitting in a bath. It did not look like an old nursing home photo. It looked like a normal family picture, something someone might have taken at home. The children were close together, smiling, or at least sitting in the tub in a way that should have looked innocent. But their eyes had been scratched out, not blurred, not covered by glare. Scratched out. Someone had taken something sharp and dragged it over each child's face where the eyes should have been. The damage was deliberate. You could see the marks in the paper. I stopped in front of it. For a few seconds, I just stared. The image was disturbing in a way I cannot fully explain. It was not just because the children's eyes had been ruined. It was because the picture had been taped to a window inside an abandoned nursing home, where no one should have been living, decorating, or leaving things behind. It did not feel like ordinary vandalism. Of course, it probably was. Someone could have found the photo somewhere. Someone could have brought it in as a joke. It could have been left by another person exploring the building, trying to scare whoever came after them. That would be the most logical explanation. But in the moment, standing in that hallway with sunlight coming through the glass and darkness waiting farther down the corridor, it did not feel like a prank. It felt like a warning. I remember thinking that the place had bad energy. I do not normally use words like that. I do not usually walk into a building and decide it is cursed, haunted, or evil. But there are places that give you a feeling before anything even happens. Your body notices something before your mind can explain it. The air felt wrong. The silence felt wrong. The darkness down those halls felt wrong. And that picture, taped to the window as if someone had wanted it to be found, made the whole place feel worse. I wanted to keep exploring. That is the part that sounds stupid now. Curiosity can be stronger than fear for a while. I kept thinking that if I walked farther into the building, I might find something that explained the layout. Maybe there was another exit. Maybe the hallway only looked dark because it turned sharply. Maybe there were rooms with more windows. Maybe I would find old furniture, abandoned medical equipment, or something else that made the place feel more normal. But every time I looked toward the black hallways, I felt a knot in my stomach. It was broad daylight. That was the thing I could not get over. The sun was out. The windows were right there, yet the halls beyond the brighter area looked like they belonged to another building entirely. I stood there for a while trying to decide whether to keep going. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the faint movement of the building settling around me, a small creak from somewhere above, a soft sound that might have been wind moving through an open section of the building, maybe a loose piece of metal tapping lightly against something. Every little noise made me pause. Then I heard something else. At first, I could not tell what it was. It sounded like a soft scrape above me. Not loud, not heavy, just a brief sound from the ceiling. I looked up. There were ceiling tiles above me, old and stained in places. Some looked like they had been damaged by water. Some were missing or hanging unevenly. That was not unusual in an abandoned building. I remember thinking maybe something had shifted. Maybe an animal was in the ceiling. A squirrel, a rat, a bird, anything. That would have made sense. Old buildings attract animals. Something small, moving above the ceiling tiles, would explain a sound. But then one of the ceiling sections moved. Not a whole tile falling down. Not a small piece of plaster breaking loose. Something pushed down from above. I froze. For a second, I thought it was just my eyes. The building was old. The light was strange. The ceiling was damaged. Maybe a loose panel had shifted because of wind. Then I saw a hand. A hand came through. It was attached to an arm. The arm pushed down from the ceiling as if someone above it was trying to pull themselves through. I remember seeing fingers first, then the wrist, then part of the arm. The hand was pale or dirty, but I could not see it clearly enough to tell whether it belonged to someone alive, someone hiding, or whether the shadows were distorting what I was looking at. Then I saw more. It looked like half of a human body was coming out of the ceiling, not fully dropping down, not falling, just appearing from above, as if someone was trying to force their way through a place no person should have been able to fit. It was too sudden for me to understand. My brain did not have time to decide whether it was a person, an animal, a prank, a broken ceiling panel, or something else. I just saw the hand. I saw the shape of someone attached to it. And I ran. I did not investigate. I did not stay to look closer. I did not wait to see whether the person dropped down or spoke. I turned and ran toward the nearest way out. I remember my feet slipping slightly on the floor. I remember my heart pounding so hard that it felt painful. I remember not looking behind me because I was terrified I would see something following. The nearest exit was a window. I did not stop to think about whether it was safe. I did not stop to check whether there was glass still in it. I just needed to get outside. I got through the window and out of that building as quickly as I could. I remember hitting the ground outside, stumbling and trying to get farther away from the wall. My hands were shaking. My legs felt weak. I turned back toward the building, expecting to see movement in the window or someone looking down at me. Instead, I saw my friend. My friend had stayed outside. They had not gone in with me, or at least they were outside when I came running out. They looked scared, too. Before I could even fully explain what I had seen, they told me they saw something. They had seen it from outside. Not every detail, but enough to know I was not just reacting to nothing. They had seen a hand. They had seen something moving near the ceiling or through the window area. That was what made the whole thing worse. If I had been alone, I could have blamed the darkness, the bad atmosphere, the creepy photo, and the way abandoned buildings can make normal things seem terrifying. I could have told myself I had seen a broken ceiling tile move and imagined the rest. But my friend had seen something too. They had stayed outside, in daylight, looking at the building from a different angle. And they were creeped out. We stood there for a few minutes, trying to make sense of it. Neither of us wanted to go back inside. We talked about whether it could have been another person in the building. That was possible. Maybe someone had been living there. Maybe another explorer had climbed into the ceiling somehow. Maybe there was a squatter inside. Maybe the hand belonged to a person hiding above the hallway. That would have been frightening enough. But the problem was that I could not understand how someone could have been up there. The ceiling space did not seem large enough. The building was damaged, yes, but what I saw did not look like someone simply leaning through a hole. It looked like half a person coming through the ceiling itself. I know that sounds impossible. Maybe I saw it wrong. Maybe fear made it seem bigger and stranger than it was. Maybe there was a hole I did not notice. Maybe someone had climbed into the space above the ceiling from another part of the building. Maybe I only saw an arm and my mind filled in the rest. But I know I saw a hand. I know it was attached to something. And I know that whatever was there came out of the ceiling enough to make me run through a window. Afterward, we walked away from the building as fast as we could. Neither of us wanted to stand around and keep staring at it. The nursing home still looked quiet from outside. The sunlight still hit the walls. The windows still reflected the sky. From a distance, it looked empty, but I could not stop looking at the upper parts of the building. I kept expecting to see movement behind a window. I kept expecting that hand to appear again. I kept thinking about the picture of the 3 children in the bath with their eyes scratched out. That picture had been the first thing that made me feel like the building was wrong. The hand was what made me leave. But there was one other thing outside that I remember clearly. A single rose. It was the only living thing around the place. The grounds were overgrown and neglected. There was dead grass, weeds, cracked pavement, and the general look of a property that had been left alone for too long. There were no people, no birds nearby that I noticed, no animals running through the brush, no obvious sign of anything alive. But there was one rose, just one. It was growing near the building or somewhere close to the grounds, standing out against everything else. I do not know why that bothered me so much. A rose is not frightening. It is just a flower. There could have been an old rose bush there from when the nursing home was active. The plant could have survived after everything else around it was neglected. It could have been growing because of the season, because of rain, because of sunlight, because plants do not care whether a building feels creepy to humans. There was nothing supernatural about one flower. But after seeing the photo, the black hallways, And the hand coming from the ceiling, the rose felt wrong too. It was too bright, too alive, too out of place. The entire area around it seemed dead, empty, and forgotten. Then there was this one rose growing alone, as if it did not belong to the same place. I remember staring at it for a second before leaving. Then I remember thinking I did not want to be there anymore. Not outside, not inside, not anywhere near that building. We left. I never went back. I have thought about it many times since then. I have tried to make sense of the darkness first. There are probably normal reasons why one part of the building was in sunlight, while the hallways beyond looked pitch black. The windows might have been blocked from the other side. The layout may have created deep shadows. The contrast between the bright sunlight and the interior could have made the darker halls look darker than they really were. That makes sense. The human eye struggles with extreme contrast. If you are standing in a bright place and looking into a dark one, the dark area can look like a solid wall until your eyes adjust. Maybe that was all it was. Then there was the photo. That was probably vandalism. Someone could have brought it in, someone could have found it in the building and damaged it. People go into abandoned places and leave creepy things behind because they know other people will find them. It could have been meant to scare visitors. That is probably the simplest explanation. Then there was the hand. That is the part I cannot settle in my mind. Maybe it was another person. Maybe there was someone living in the building, hiding from the outside world. Maybe they heard me walking through the hallway and tried to stay out of sight. Maybe they were in the ceiling space and accidentally shifted a panel. Maybe they were trying to scare me. If so, it worked. Maybe it was an animal. But it did not look like an animal. I saw fingers. I saw a hand. And my friend saw enough from outside to be unsettled too. Maybe it was a broken ceiling panel combined with a strange shadow. Maybe I saw part of a pipe, insulation, hanging wires, and some object that looked like a hand for 1 second. Maybe fear made my brain turn it into a human shape. That is possible. Abandoned buildings are full of things that look strange in bad light. They are unsafe, unstable, and full of broken materials. A hanging piece of fabric can look like a person. A damaged wall can look like a face. A branch scraping a window can sound like someone trying to get in, but it did not feel like that at the time. It felt like something was there, something that had been above me, something that had noticed I was standing below it. The building had a bad feeling from the moment I walked inside. I do not know whether that was because it had once been a nursing home. Places like that hold a certain sadness, even when nothing paranormal has ever happened there. People get sick there. People die there. Families visit, leave, worry, grieve, and eventually stop coming. When a place like that is abandoned, it can feel like all the life was removed, but the history stayed behind. Maybe that was what I felt. Maybe I walked into a building that already had a heavy atmosphere and let my imagination take over. Maybe the dark hallways and creepy photo made me more likely to panic when something moved above me. Maybe I scared myself. But the fact that my friend saw something too has always stayed with me. We both left scared. We both agreed that we did not want to go back. And neither of us ever did. I have been in old buildings since then. I have seen abandoned houses, empty warehouses, neglected structures, and places where the wind makes strange sounds through broken windows. I know now that most haunted feelings have normal causes. Drafts, bad wiring, animals, shadows, old pipes, loose walls, and the human imagination can create a lot of fear. But that nursing home was different. It was broad daylight. The windows were bright. The hallway behind me was lit. Yet the rest of the building seemed to disappear into blackness. There was a picture of 3 children with their eyes scratched out, taped to the glass. There was a hand attached to something that came out of the ceiling. And outside, in the middle of dead grass and an abandoned property, there was one single rose. Maybe all of it had an explanation. Maybe every part of it was normal when seen from the right angle. But I did not stay long enough to find out. I ran, and I never went back. Mine happened only about 3 weeks ago, which is probably why it still gets under my skin so easily. Usually, when I tell a creepy story that happened a long time ago, I can put some distance between myself and it. I can laugh a little. I can tell myself that I was younger, more nervous, less practical, or more likely to make something ordinary seem worse than it was. But this one is recent. I am still sleeping in the same room. I still sit in the same place on the bed. I still look toward the same bathroom doorway every night. And every time I remember that sound, I get that cold little feeling in my chest all over again. Our bedroom is connected directly to the bathroom. The doorway is maybe 10 feet from my side of the bed, close enough that I can see part of the bathroom entrance from where I sit. It is one of those normal attached bathroom setups. Nothing unusual about it during the day. There is the main doorway leading from the bedroom into the bathroom. Then, inside the bathroom, there are 2 other doors. One leads to a linen closet, and the other leads to a walk-in closet. Both of those doors normally stay closed. They are not shut because the rooms are creepy or because we are trying to keep something in or out. They stay shut because of my cat, River. River gets into everything. If there is a closet open, River will find it. If there is a shelf with towels on it, River will climb it. If there is a basket, bag, cupboard, cabinet, or space that should not possibly be interesting, River will somehow decide it is the most important location in the entire house. The linen closet is especially tempting because it has towels, blankets, and little spaces behind things where a cat can disappear. The walk-in closet is worse. There are clothes, shoes, boxes, and plenty of places for River to crawl into and make us think she has vanished. So we keep both doors closed. It has become automatic. Before bed, we make sure the bathroom doors are shut. It is not even something we think much about anymore. We just do it because we know what happens when River gets loose in a closet. A few weeks ago, I was sitting on the bed at night. It was not especially late, but it was late enough that the house had settled into that quiet nighttime mood. The lights were lower. The bedroom was calm. My husband was somewhere else in the house, close enough that I could call for him, but not sitting beside me at that exact moment. River was next to me, eating. I remember that detail very clearly, because it made the situation feel more ordinary right before it became strange. There is something comforting about hearing a cat eat. The tiny crunching sounds, the little pause between bites, the way they seem completely focused on the bowl like nothing else in the world exists. River was right there by the bed, eating calmly. I was sitting in my usual spot. The bathroom doorway was nearby. Nothing felt unusual. Then I heard a door slam. Not a little click. Not the sound of a cabinet settling. Not a soft creak from a house shifting. It sounded like an actual door being slammed shut inside the bathroom. It was sudden enough that I jumped before I had time to think. The sound came from behind the bathroom doorway, close enough that I immediately knew it had to be one of the 2 interior doors. The linen closet door or the walk-in closet door. I froze. For a second, I did not move at all. River stopped eating, or at least, I think she paused. I remember looking at her, then looking toward the bathroom. I was trying to decide whether she had somehow gotten in there, even though both doors had been closed. That was my first thought. Maybe River had pushed one of the doors open. Maybe she had slipped inside earlier without me noticing. Maybe she had climbed against the door, gotten it open somehow, and then it swung shut behind her. That would explain the sound. It would not be impossible. Cats can do strange things. River had already proven many times that a closed door was more of a suggestion than a real obstacle if she was determined enough. But I knew both doors had been shut. I was almost certain of it. And the slam had been loud. Too loud for the way those doors normally move. I sat there staring toward the bathroom entrance. The bedroom was still quiet afterward. No more sound. No scratching. No little cat noises. No movement from inside the closet. No second slam. That silence made it worse. If I had heard River meowing or digging around, I would have had an answer. If I had heard something fall, I could have assumed she had knocked something over. If I had seen one of the closet doors standing open from the bed, I could have gone in and figured it out. But all I had was the sound. One sharp, sudden door slam from inside the bathroom. Then, nothing. I did what any brave, capable person would do in that situation. I yelled for my husband. I did not go in there myself. I called out to him and told him there had been a noise in the bathroom. It was probably not my proudest moment, especially because my husband is honestly a bit of a wuss himself. He is not exactly the person you would send first into a haunted house. He is not the one who watches horror movies and says, "Let's go check that dark basement." He is more likely to say nope and suggest we both stay in the living room where there are lights. But somehow, when there is a strange noise, you still call your husband. Maybe it is because having another person there makes things feel less ridiculous. Maybe you want someone else to hear what you heard. Maybe you want someone else to be the first one to open the door, even if that person is just as nervous as you are. He came in and asked what happened. I told him I heard a door slam in the bathroom. I pointed toward the doorway. He looked at me for a second, probably trying to decide whether I was joking. I was not. Then he went to check. I stayed on the bed. That sounds pathetic, but I did not care. I had no interest in walking 10 feet into a bathroom where I had just heard one of the closed closet doors slam on its own. He went through the bedroom doorway and into the bathroom. I watched him disappear from where I was sitting. The whole time I was listening for something. A cat running. A door opening. A startled yell. Anything. But I heard almost nothing. Then he came back out. He said there was nothing there. Both doors were closed, or at least they were in their normal positions. There was no obvious sign that one had swung open and slammed shut. River was not trapped in the linen closet. She was not hiding in the walk-in closet. Nothing had fallen. Nothing looked disturbed. The bathroom was empty. The closets were empty. River was still beside me. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made the whole thing harder to explain. Because if River had been in there, I could have blamed her. If a towel had fallen from a shelf and knocked something against the door, I could have blamed that. If one of the closet doors had been partly open, I could have said a draft pushed it shut. But there was nothing. My husband, being himself, probably did not want to think about it too much. He may have said the house shifted. He may have said the air pressure changed. He may have suggested one of the doors had not been fully latched and swung shut because of a draft. Those are reasonable explanations. Bathrooms can create weird air pressure changes. Opening or closing another door somewhere in the house can make a closet door move. Heating or air conditioning can create a small current. A door that seems closed may not be fully shut. A change in temperature can make materials shift, hinges creak, and doors move in strange ways. I know all of that. But the sound I heard did not feel like a gentle door moving because of air. It sounded like a slam. A strong, clear, unmistakable slam. It was the kind of sound that makes your body react before your mind has a chance to argue with it. I remember the exact moment afterward. River was still near me. My husband had checked. The bathroom was empty, the doors were closed, and I was sitting on the bed, staring at that doorway as if something might come through it at any moment. Nothing did. The rest of the night was normal. No more slamming, no scratching from the closets, no lights flickering, no strange voices, no cat acting terrified or running away. River went back to being River. She finished eating, probably looked at us like we were both being dramatic, and continued doing whatever cats do when humans are clearly upset over something they do not understand. My husband eventually went back to what he had been doing. But I kept thinking about it. The more I replayed the sound in my mind, the more it bothered me. There were only 2 doors inside that bathroom. The linen closet, the walk-in closet. Both had been closed before. Both were supposed to stay closed because of River. There should not have been any reason for either one to open and slam shut. I began trying to reconstruct what could have happened. Maybe one of the doors had been left slightly open without us noticing. Maybe it had slowly drifted wider because of airflow, then suddenly slammed when air pressure changed. That can happen in houses sometimes, especially if a window is open somewhere else, or if the heating or air conditioning turns on. But neither door usually behaved that way. They were not loose, at least not that I knew of. They did not normally swing by themselves. They did not normally slam shut at random. Maybe the house settled. Old houses make noises. Even newer houses make noises. Wood expands and contracts. Pipes move. Walls pop. Ceilings creak. A noise from one part of the house can sound like it came from another part. Maybe something shifted above the bathroom. Maybe a vent made a sound that echoed strangely. Maybe an object in the closet moved and hit a door without leaving anything obvious behind. That was possible too. But I was sitting only 10 feet away. The sound came from the bathroom. It sounded like a door, and I had heard it clearly. I am not saying it was a ghost. I do not know what it was. It could have been something completely normal that sounded much more dramatic because it happened at night when the house was quiet and I was sitting right near the doorway. That is probably what it was. But knowing that does not stop the fear from returning when I sit in the same spot now. The bathroom is still there. The doorway is still 10 feet away. The linen closet door is still closed. The walk-in closet door is still closed. River still tries to get into everything. Sometimes I look at the bathroom entrance while I am sitting on the bed and think about that night. I think about how normal everything felt right before it happened. River eating beside me, the quiet room, the normal house sounds, then that slam, one sudden noise, one empty bathroom, one husband being sent in to investigate despite being a big wuss himself, and me sitting there afterward trying not to stare at the doorway too hard. The worst thing about experiences like that is not always the event itself. It is what happens afterward. You start noticing things you never noticed before. A closet door closing normally sounds louder than it used to. The bathroom fan turning on makes you look up. A pipe clicking in the wall sounds like something moving. River scratching at another door makes your heart jump for a second. You start checking whether the closet doors are fully closed before bed, even though you already checked them. You start remembering the sound at the worst possible times, like when you are in bed alone for a few minutes, or when the house is quiet, or when you are sitting in the exact same place where you heard it. I have thought about whether I should test the doors, open them slightly, see if they swing shut on their own, turn on the bathroom fan, open windows, turn the heating on and off, try to recreate the sound. But I have not really wanted to. Part of me wants an explanation. The practical part of me would love to discover that one hinge is loose, one door catches air in a weird way, and the sound can happen under specific conditions. But another part of me does not want to hear that slam again, because if I cannot recreate it, then I am left right where I started, sitting on the bed, river beside me, a bathroom 10 feet away, and a sound that seemed to come from behind a closed door. I know people would probably say it was air pressure or a door settling. They may be right. Maybe the door did open slightly and slam shut before my husband came in, then settled back into place. Maybe River had somehow bumped something earlier and it shifted later. Maybe there was a small draft I did not feel. Maybe a nearby window or exterior door changed the airflow in just the right way. There are plenty of explanations, but at the time, none of them occurred to me. At the time, it sounded like someone was in the bathroom, someone opening a door, someone slamming it shut, and when my husband checked, there was no one there. That is why it still creeps me out. Not because I believe something is definitely in the house. Not because I think the closets are haunted. Not because I think River saw something and did not tell me, although, honestly, cats are suspicious enough that I would not put it past her. It creeps me out because it happened in the most ordinary place possible. My own bedroom, my own bathroom, a few steps from my bed, a place I go every night without thinking. Now, whenever I sit there at night and look toward the doorway, I remember that slam, and I find myself hoping the closet doors stay exactly where they are. Tonight's stories are over, but darkness has a way of making memories feel closer. Some people never forgot what they saw. Others never learned what was behind the sound, the voice, or the shape waiting just outside the light. Tell me in the comments which story you will be thinking about after this ends. Subscribe to Wickless Night for more true accounts from the hours when no one wants to be awake alone. Sleep carefully, and do not trust every shadow that stays still.